Hello everybody, welcome back to the Art and Storytelling Guild. Today we're going to be talking about a very important part of storytelling, which is adding interest to your story. So why is this an important part of the story? Well, if you want to share your story with other people, you want them to be excited to read it, and you want them to continue to be excited throughout the story. Unless you really go the extra mile, people are just going to want to put down the book if they're bored. If your story seems to be just like any other story, then they wouldn't have any reason to read it. So today we're going to talk about ways that you can keep the reader interested and keep them looped into your story. Let's start with the part that's going to form your reader's first impression of your story. And this, of course, is the beginning. The beginning is where you can show your reader that your story is one of a kind, that it's unique. You may want to make the beginning of your story sort of unconventional, something unexpected, and there are a couple of different ways to do this. You can make the first line of your story a piece of dialogue, something that the character says. This throws the reader into the action of the story immediately. There's no slow build-up, they're just right into it. Similarly, you can skip all the stuff that we talked about before when we were talking about beginnings, about how you introduce the characters and the antagonist and the plot, and you can go ahead and begin the meat of your story and then just introduce things as they become relevant. You could even start at the very end of your story, if the ending is pretty surprising or not something that you would expect. You can go ahead and spoil the ending if you think that the way you get to the ending is pretty unpredictable. Finally, you can create a bit of irony in the beginning of your story. By having the beginning be kind of an opposite voice or tone than the rest of the story. If your story is fairly lighthearted, then you can try using a very serious or sad tone in the beginning. This way, the rest of your story will go against the reader's expectations and surprise them. The beginning of your story isn't the only place that you can go against a reader's expectations. You can also use a plot twist. A plot twist is any point in your story when something unexpected happens. This can be an event that nobody could have predicted, like a natural disaster, or it can be the introduction of a new character, one that suddenly throws a wrench into everybody's operations. They're generally things that the reader did not see coming. But you do need to be careful when it comes to plot twists. You want to make sure that whatever your plot twist is, it makes sense for your story. Either it helps the growth of the protagonist, or it solves a problem that would have gone unsolved otherwise, or it just generally helps the plot of the story move along. There are several writers out there that don't use plot twists in this way. Instead, they use it as a way to kind of feel superior over the readers, to be like, haha, gotcha, I know you didn't see that one coming. But the plot twist doesn't make sense in their story. There's no reason for it to be there, and readers are smart and they can tell this. So if your plot twist isn't previously planned, you want to make sure that it checks out with everything else in the story, or else it will stand out and it'll make it seem kind of weird. Another very common tool that writers use to add interesting stuff to their story is adding action, or adding a scene that is a little more exciting than the rest of the story. And this may come in the form of a high-speed chase, or a fight between characters, maybe the protagonist and antagonist have a clash, or it can be any point in the story when building tension breaks. And other than in the climax of your story, this sort of tool will probably only occur in the rising action. But if you wanted to put it in the beginning of your story, that would also work because it's like we talked about before, where you're kind of throwing the reader right into the action. Wherever you put the action in your story, though, it needs to serve a purpose of either breaking building tension that had been building up for a while, or as a way to sort of surprise the reader. But as we were talking about with plot twists, you want to make sure that it makes sense in the story. If it doesn't make sense for there to be a huge battle royale fight scene in the middle of a romantic comedy, then don't put it in there, because it'll either confuse the reader or make it very obvious that you're trying to add more interesting stuff to the story. Now, the next method for adding interest that we're going to talk about is comedy. Now, you may have heard silly side characters in certain movies, books, TV shows, whatever, be called comic relief characters. And why do you think that is? It's because without these characters, the story would seem too bogged down and too serious and sad. So a lot of creators add these characters as a way to sort of lighten up the mood. and keep their story from becoming a tragedy. And this doesn't have to be an entire character, it can be certain moments that you add. Maybe a very serious, stiff-collared character does something completely out of character and very surprising and acts super silly. That can go against the reader's expectations and make them laugh while also kind of keeping them on their toes because they don't really know what's going to happen next now. And as I mentioned in a previous video, because you can't rely on visual gags or loud noises in a book, you're generally going to want to rely on irony for your comedy in writing, which is going against a reader's expectations for a story. And of course, this keeps them interested. Now, dialogue is a very useful tool when it comes to trying to keep your story interesting. As you've probably noticed in the books that you've already read, the proper way to write dialogue is by leaving a space between the previous paragraph, the piece of dialogue, and the next paragraph. This means that dialogue can be used to break up a big chunk of text or a really long paragraph that might be overwhelming to readers or just really boring to look at. So dialogue, as well as being a way to further the story and let us know what the characters are thinking, is also a way to just add a visual cue to the reader that, hey, things are going on here and things are changing. There's more to this story than just this rectangle of words. Another helpful thing that dialogue does is it makes the book feel less like a textbook or a biography and feel more like a play where the characters have lines and feelings and emotions. It makes the characters easier for the reader to sympathize, and it also gives you an opportunity to create individuality between characters, to make them unique, because different people talk in different ways, and you can show that in writing. Now, there are some important things for you to keep in mind when writing dialogue for your characters, mostly their personality, because if somebody is super happy-go-lucky and very energetic and excited most of the time, they're not going to sound super quiet or serious when they're talking. And beyond that, you want to think about when two characters are having a dialogue with each other, how they're probably going to interact with one another. Do they know each other? Are they friends? Are they enemies? These things are going to affect the sort of conversation they're going to have with one another. Now finally, another common mistake or misstep that writers have when writing dialogue is by using the same words way too much. This is mostly the word said. So now let's look at how you can change these words and find alternatives to them to make the story less monotonous and repetitive. And there are a bunch of different words that you can use to make a story less boring. And let's start with the most common one that people use too much. A lot of times when writing dialogue, people use said way too much. It'll be he said this, she said that, they said this, they said that. And it's just not very descriptive. You don't know how they're saying those words, and you can't hear them because they're on paper. So when you're writing dialogue, you want to think about what the characters are feeling when they say something and how they say it. So instead of said, you can use words like shouted, explained, or muttered, depending on how in your head the characters are saying these words. Now, another common place that people use the same words too much is when describing emotions. You want to be as specific as possible when describing your character's emotions so that your reader can better understand them. So think about what they're feeling. Are they happy? Are they just happy? Or are they joyful, optimistic, proud, or confident? Are they afraid? Or are they anxious, worried, or terrified? Are they angry? Or are they jealous, resentful, insulted, or hurt? Are they just sad? Or are they lonely? Are they empty, depressed, or ashamed? The unique situations that you put your characters in will cause them to have unique emotional reactions, and you want to very effectively and very clearly communicate this to your reader. So for your activity today, since you most likely have quite a bit of writing done, I want you to go back and look at your writing again. Are there any points that you think could be made more interesting? I want you to try and find at least 3 points that your story could be made more interesting. And if there aren't 3 points that you think need to be edited, that's fine. Just find as many as you can, because I really don't want you to do what I've said before and try too hard to make it interesting. But I want you to try and see if you can find these 3 places. And I want you to tell me what was wrong with it, what you did to fix it, what you left there that you really liked, and why you fixed it the way you did. As usual, I'll see you guys back on the Hangout at 2:40, and I can't wait to see what you did.